quiet morning drive, a black man nervously heads to his first day in a new leadership role. Suddenly, a police cruiser speeds past him, swerving recklessly and endangering others on the road. He quickly signals for it to pull over, but the two officers step out and instead of explaining, they mock him, insult him, burn his documents, and beat him. What they don't know is the man they're attacking isn't just any driver, and once they learn who he really is, it'll be too late for regret. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. The morning was unnaturally still. At 6:15 a.m., Glenridge lay beneath a heavy veil of fog, thick like wet cotton pressed against the skin. The city hadn't fully opened its eyes. Lights in windows flickered to life one by one like hesitant heartbeats. On the edge of Maple Avenue, a teenage paperboy pedaled lazily through the mist, tossing newspapers without looking up. A dog barked once, distant and hoarse. The day was just beginning, but it already carried a weight, a kind of silence that didn't soothe, but watched. That weight moved silently down Riverton Road, inside a weathered black Ford Crown Victoria, gliding through the fog like a shadow with direction. Its engine purred low, patient, like it had nowhere to be but every reason to get there. Behind the wheel sat a man who looked carved from self-restraint, eyes sharp beneath furrowed brows, back straight with the posture of someone who'd spent his life proving he belonged in rooms built to keep him out. His name was Calvin Booker, 52, black, and today he would walk into Glenridge City Hall as the first black mayor in the town's history. No fanfare, no flashing lights. Just him and the weight of a promise that change would start from the ground up. Calvin wore a pressed light blue dress shirt under a dark navy overcoat, modest, clean, and precise. His hands, dark and steady, rested at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. The local jazz station hummed softly, Miles Davis melting into the cabin air like a memory. He didn't hum along. He didn't smile. His mind was quiet, focused not on his speech waiting in the passenger seat, but on the history behind him and the responsibility ahead. The buildings passing outside his window weren't just scenery. They were chapters of his life. Cracked brick walls, shuttered shops, sidewalks he once swept as a boy for quarters. As he neared Riverfront Boulevard, the jazz cut to static, and he reached down to switch it off. That's when he saw it. A flash of white ahead. Standard issue police cruisers. Swerving across both lanes, once, then again. No sirens, no urgency. Just sloppiness and speed. His jaw tightened. He watched it bounce over the dividing lines like a child playing with someone else's rules. Something in his gut shifted. Not fear, not yet, but the kind of alertness you don't unlearn after growing up where bad things often wear a badge. He slowed down slightly, keeping a careful distance. He flicked his headlights. Once. Nothing. Twice. Still nothing. Then a long, deliberate third time. The squad car kept swerving. Calvin reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his official badge, embossed in leather with the seal of Glenridge. He set it on the dashboard like someone laying down a hand in a game where the stakes were always higher for men who looked like him. With a quiet breath through his nose, he pressed the gas, enough to close the gap, enough to say, "This ends now." Finally, the cruiser slowed, drifting lazily toward the gravel shoulder beside an old gas station with a broken neon sign that buzzed faintly in the fog. Calvin followed and parked a few feet behind. The street was deserted. The fog now peeled back just enough to reveal faded murals on cracked brick walls. Trash tumbling lightly in the morning wind. He shifted into park, engine idling. For a moment he sat still, his fingers curled loosely around the door handle. He wasn't nervous, but he wasn't numb either. There was something in the air, something too familiar. Like a lesson he'd already learned, coming back in a different form. He looked once in the rearview mirror. No fear in his eyes, just patience. Just the tight-coiled readiness of a man who knew how quickly respect could turn to ridicule. He opened the door and stepped into the cold, damp street, the fog brushing his coat like fingers trying to hold him back. The street was empty, but he wasn't alone. This was more than a traffic stop, This was a moment drawn straight from America's long, tired script, but this time Calvin Booker wasn't just a black man with questions, he was the mayor. And someone was about to find out what that meant. But before Calvin could speak a word, the driver's side door of the patrol car slammed open with a metallic thud. Out stepped a young white officer, no older than his late 20s, skinny, sharp-jawed, with a buzz cut and a cocky bounce in his step. His mirrored sunglasses caught the early morning light, even in the fog, and his mouth curled into a smirk the moment he laid eyes on Calvin. The passenger door opened a beat later. A larger, broader man climbed out, arms thick as fence posts, resting one hand lazily on the handle of his baton. Neither said a word at first. They just stood there, staring like they were waiting for a punchline. Calvin raised one hand in a calm, practiced gesture. Palms open, no sudden moves. "Good morning," he said evenly, his voice measured, low but firm. "I noticed some erratic driving back there. I'd like to see your IDs and badge numbers." Hold the hell up," the skinny one cut in, chuckling, walking slowly toward him like a man approaching something he already thought was beneath him. "What the hell is this? You pulling us over?" He laughed again, louder this time, then looked at his partner and nodded toward Calvin. "Yo, look at this guy. Shirt tucked in, coat ironed, standing like he's about to give a damn press conference." Calvin didn't smile. He didn't move. "I'm Calvin Booker. I was elected to office 2 weeks ago. Today's my first official day as mayor of Glenridge." He reached slowly into his coat and pulled out his badge holder. "I'm asking you to identify yourselves, officers." The larger one snorted and stepped closer, shaking his head. "Mayor, huh? Oh, is that what we're calling it these days? You know how many dudes we catch flashing fake shit around here?" He snatched the leather holder from Calvin's hand without permission and flipped it open. For a moment there was silence. Then the skinny one whistled and laughed. "Mayor, my ass. You really think walking around dressed like a Walgreens lawyer and flapping your gums makes you somebody? Man, I've seen better fakes sold in gas station parking lots." He turned to his partner. "What you think? Looks legit?" The big one shrugged and, with one fluid motion, struck a lighter. Before Calvin could stop him, he held the flame under the edge of the badge sleeve. Plastic bubbled. The official city seal blackened. Within seconds, the badge was a melted, useless husk. The lighter clicked closed. Calvin's eyes didn't leave theirs. His jaw clenched, but his voice stayed calm, cooler than the situation deserved. "You just destroyed official city property. I'm warning you." "Nah, man," the skinny one sneered, stepping up close, too close, breath warm and sour in the cold air. "We're warning you. Who the hell do you think you are, trying to check cops like you're in charge? This ain't your block, you ain't our boss, and you sure as hell ain't no damn mayor." The larger officer circled around to Calvin's side, muttering, "Could be one of those sovereign citizen nut jobs. They always act polite right before they pull a weapon. I say we pat him down." "Agreed," the first one said. "Spread your arms, smart guy, now." He tapped Calvin on the chest with 2 fingers, firm, dismissive. Calvin stood his ground, eyes locked, voice cold. "You touch me, and you'll be facing felony assault on an elected official." "Fell in my balls," the skinny one spat, now shoving Calvin back a step. "You're about 2 minutes from getting face down on the pavement if you don't shut the hell up." A line had been crossed, then another, but the worst was yet to come. The shove wasn't hard enough to knock Calvin down, but it was meant to humiliate, the kind of shove that says, "You don't matter here," the kind that's not about control, but domination. Calvin took a step back to keep balance, his shoes scraping against the gravel shoulder. He kept his voice low, but his eyes now carried a quiet fire. "You're way out of line." "Nah," the skinny one hissed. "What's out of line is your big mouth thinking you run the show. This ain't some city hall speech, old man. This is the street, and out here," he leaned closer, grinning, "we write the rules." The bigger cop didn't wait. He moved in, fast and without a word, grabbing Calvin's arm and twisting it back. Calvin winced but didn't yell. He struggled to pull free, but the grip was brutal, practiced. "I got him," the officer growled, like Calvin was game to be bagged. "Let's see what this mayor is hiding." The skinny one circled to the other side, pulling open Calvin's coat roughly and reaching inside without consent. You got drugs, huh? A little something in your jacket pocket? What else you carrying, Mr. Mayor? Oh, I know. You probably got a chip on your damn shoulder, that's what you got. Calvin's voice cracked out, sharp and controlled, but strained under pressure. That's enough, I'm telling you. The response was a punch to the gut, sudden, cowardly, delivered with the dull thud of someone who knew exactly how to take breath away without leaving too much blood. Calvin staggered, gasped, one knee buckling, but he didn't fall. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself upright. Oh, he's got some fight in him, the bigger cop muttered, almost sounding amused. Bet he's used to running his mouth behind a desk, not so much when he's got boots in his face. The skinny one raised his baton. You better shut it down now before I give you a reason to forget your name. What the hell do you think you're doing? Calvin snapped, breath shallow but voice still iron. This is assault. I'm going to have your badges, both of you. You're finished. But the only answer he got was laughter. Short, sharp, and sickening. Man, shut the hell up, the skinnier one barked. Nobody gives a damn who you say you are. Around here, black dude yelling about rights don't mean shit unless we say so. Then came the crack. A clean, vicious hit to the ribs. The baton didn't break skin, but it rattled his breath, knocked the wind clean from his lungs. Calvin dropped to one knee this time, one hand bracing against the ground. His coat flared open, his ID folder sliding out and landing beside his shoe, half melted from earlier. Half visible still. Neither officer cared. The big one stepped forward again, reaching for his collar. Get up. Let's see if you still talk big when you're kissing pavement. But something snapped, not in Calvin's body, but in his soul. He didn't flinch, didn't plead. His eyes locked onto the officer's face with a look that silenced even the mocking tone. Then, in one swift move, he lunged upward, shoved the big one back with both arms, knocking him off balance. The man cursed, stumbled, and nearly tripped. The skinny one raised the baton again, but Calvin was faster. He spun toward his car, yanked the door open, and slammed himself inside, hitting the locks. Inside the car, breath ragged, ribs burning, Calvin grabbed the radio mic tucked beneath the dash. One connected directly to the city's encrypted channel. Voice shaking, but words precise, he spoke into the receiver. This is Mayor Calvin Booker. Badge number 2075. I am under physical assault by 2 Glen Ridge PD officers. Requesting emergency response. I repeat, emergency response. Code black. Outside, fists pounded the windows. The skinny cop's face was twisted with rage. Open this damn door. You think this window gonna save your ass? The glass shook. Dull thuds echoed through the frame. Calvin didn't look away. He kept his hand firm on the mic, eyes forward, mouth set. He was bruised, bleeding, but far from broken. He knew help was on its way. He just had to survive the next few minutes, and out there, 2 men in uniform were losing what little control they ever deserved to have. The fists on the window were getting louder, more erratic, like a pair of wild dogs circling a locked gate. Calvin could see their mouths moving, yelling threats, spitting curses, but he couldn't hear them clearly anymore, not over the thudding of his pulse in his ears, not over the storm building behind his sternum. Inside the car, the air felt thin. The silence was broken only by the faint metallic crackle of the encrypted radio, confirming his distress call. Then, faintly, he heard it. The sound that always made them nervous. Sirens. The skinny cop froze first. His hand still rested on the driver's side window, breath fogging up the glass. The sound grew louder, closer. Not one siren, but several, wailing in unison like wolves answering a cry. The big one backed up, frowning, eyes scanning the fog. What the hell is that? Shit, the skinny one muttered. That better not be who I think it is. But Calvin knew that particular pattern, 3 short wails, then a long one, was used only by the city's emergency response unit, the same one assigned to high-risk protection of elected officials. Within seconds, flashing red and blue cut through the fog like blade slashes. A black SUV came to a screeching stop, tires kissing the curb just feet from Calvin's car. Another squad car behind it, a third, then a fourth. The scene exploded with movement. Doors flung open, boots hitting pavement, and in the middle of them all, a man stepped out, wearing a dark trench coat and a gold badge hanging on a chain across his chest. His voice sliced through the chaos like a gunshot. "Step away from that vehicle, hands where I can see them." The two officers froze. No swagger now, no smirking, just pale faces and darting eyes. Whoa, hang on," the skinny one stammered, holding his hands half up. "This ain't what it looks like, all right? We had a situation. Didn't know who the guy was. He was acting shady. We thought he might be—" "Acting shady?" the man in the trench coat barked, cutting him off. "And man is the sitting mayor of Glenridge. You put your hands on him. You destroyed city-issued ID. You assaulted him. Are you out of your damn minds?" The big one took a step back. "Look, nobody told us he was the mayor, okay? He was acting all high and mighty, throwing badges around like he owned the place." "He does," the man snapped. "Today is his first day in office, and you just beat the hell out of your boss." He waved his hand. "Cuff 'em both, now." As the arresting officers moved in, the two men didn't resist, but their mouths kept moving. "This is bullshit," the skinny one yelled. "We didn't even do nothing. He didn't provoke. He started it, coming at us like he's some king or something." "We were doing our damn job," the other growled as the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists. "Guy talks too smooth, thinks he's better than everybody. Should have known it was one of them." From inside the Ford, Calvin sat up straighter. His chest still ached, his lip was cracked, but his eyes were wide open, watching it all unfold. The man in the trench coat approached his door, tapped once on the window, and opened it gently when Calvin unlocked it. "Mr. Mayor," he said, voice steady but shaken. "I'm Lieutenant Rivera. We got your call. EMTs are on the way, sir. Are you all right?" Calvin nodded slowly. His voice came out raw but firm. "I'll live." Rivera looked down, ashamed. "We're going to make this right, sir. I swear to you." Calvin's gaze drifted past him, to the two officers being walked to the curb in cuffs, still mouthing off. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because for the first time in the last 10 minutes, they were the ones who didn't look so sure of their place. By the time the ambulance pulled away, local reporters were already gathering. The fog had lifted, but the air remained heavy thick with cameras, questions, and outrage. It didn't take long. A bystander had recorded everything, from the first baton swing to the final pair of handcuffs. The video hit social media before Calvin even reached the hospital. Less than an hour later, it was everywhere. Mayor assaulted by his own officers, body cam off, live stream on. Do they treat all black men this way, or just the ones in charge? On television, anchors tried to hold their voices steady while describing the footage. On the streets, no one bothered pretending. People were pissed, outraged, hurt. In barber shops, in churches, in diners and union halls, the question rang out again and again. If this can happen to him, what chance do the rest of us have? Calvin wasn't just a man anymore. He was proof of what they feared, what they'd whispered about for years, what the city always tried to deny, that a badge doesn't make you safe. Sometimes it makes you a target. Outside City Hall, protest signs rose like blades. Protect us from the protectors. We voted for justice, not blood. Mayor Booker deserved better. At the front of the crowd stood Rosa Daniels, 68, a retired teacher who'd marched with Calvin's father during the sanitation strikes. She held a sign high over her head with shaking hands. It read, "We built this damn city. We bled for it. We're done begging." Meanwhile, the two arrested officers sat cuffed in the back of a holding unit downtown, still mouthing off. "Whole city's gone soft," the skinny one muttered through the metal grating. "Guy throws on a suit and suddenly he's a saint? Please, he should have kept his ass in the office if he didn't want to get treated like the rest of them." The bigger one cracked his knuckles, sneering. "Can't believe they're making such a damn scene out of this. It's not like we shot him or anything. Couple bruises, boo fucking who. Should see what we usually do to punks who talk back." But this time nobody was brushing it under the rug. The chief of police, red-faced and stammering, appeared in front of a podium by mid-afternoon. "We take these allegations seriously," he began, but the boos from the crowd drowned out the rest. He tried again. "We are reviewing all procedures, and—" Another shout from the crowd. You didn't review shit when it was our kids getting slammed to the ground. The chief paused, swallowed hard. The camera zoomed in. He was no longer addressing a press pool. He was facing a city fed up with silence. And somewhere, behind a closed hospital curtain, Calvin Booker sat upright on a thin cot, a bandage above his right brow, an IV line in his arm, and his cell phone buzzing nonstop. He had not yet spoken to the press, not yet tweeted, but he was watching, listening, reading every name, every message, every voice rising in the streets. He didn't need to speak just yet, because in Glen Ridge the people were speaking for him now. The courtroom was packed, wall to wall, aisle to aisle, press, protesters, politicians, preachers. The silence inside was heavy but charged, like the kind of hush that comes right before thunder. Calvin walked in wearing a dark suit, no tie. The bandage was gone, but the bruising beneath his right eye lingered, like a statement no speech could rival. As he moved to the plaintiff's table, all eyes followed him, not because he asked for them, but because he had earned them. The judge adjusted his robe, cleared his throat, and looked down at the defense side with a hard, narrowed gaze. Let's begin. The defense lawyer stood first, a man with slicked back hair and a voice too polished for the damage his clients had caused. Your Honor, he began, this is a case of misunderstanding. My clients believed they were interacting with an individual impersonating a city official. In a high-stress situation, assumptions were made, tempers flared. They regret the incident, but there was no malice, only confusion. Before he could continue, the prosecution interrupted. Permission to play the video, Your Honor? A nod from the bench. The screen lit up. What followed needed no narration. The video played without music, without cuts. Calvin's calm introduction, the smug dismissal, the badge being snatched, flames licking the corner of the leather ID case, laughter, the shove, the punch, the baton, the slurs, the hand around his throat, the threats, Calvin's lunge toward safety, his trembling hand on the radio, the sirens. When the footage ended, there was no applause, no gasp, just raw silence. The kind of silence that makes even the guilty shift in their chairs. Then came the testimony. Calvin spoke slowly, clearly, never raising his voice. He described the moment he realized the police cruiser was swerving, the moment they laughed in his face, the moment they burned his identification, the moment his ribs cracked under a baton meant to protect citizens like him. He never embellished. He didn't need to. The truth did all the work. I didn't pull them over because I was the mayor, he said, voice steady. I pulled them over because they were endangering others. But to them, a black man holding them accountable wasn't authority, it was a threat. And they responded like they always do when threatened. When cross-examined, the defense leaned into denial. Mr. Booker, would you agree that your tone might have come across as confrontational? Calvin didn't blink. If asking for accountability sounds confrontational to you, counselor, maybe the problem isn't my tone. The crowd stirred. The judge tapped his gavel once, but it wasn't until the second officer took the stand that the real twist came. Pressed under oath, palms sweating, he faltered. We were told to be cautious, he said, voice low. There's this thing, unofficial policy. We get briefed sometimes before shift changes, you know. Look out for troublemakers, guys who don't fit in certain areas. The courtroom held its breath. You mean black men, the prosecutor clarified, tone flat. The officer paused, then nodded. Yeah, that's what they meant. A ripple moved through the room, not surprise, but confirmation. The disease wasn't just in two men, it was in the walls, in the structure. And now someone had said it out loud, on the record. The judge looked up, jaw tight. This court is hereby ordering a formal inquiry into Glen Ridge Police Department's briefing practices, supervision, and discrimination complaints for the past 10 years. His gavel fell heavy. The truth had cracked open, and now it would echo. And as the court adjourned for the day, the people outside weren't just waiting for justice. They were building something bigger. The sun had barely risen when they began to gather again, this time not just in protest but in purpose. Outside Glenridge City Hall, people spilled into the plaza, young and old, black, Latino, white, veterans, and first-time voters, teachers, nurses, janitors. Even a few off-duty officers who'd finally had enough of silence. Homemade signs swayed in the wind. "It's not about one man, it's about all of us," fixed the system that made this possible. And in the center of it all stood a small wooden podium, wired for microphones and flanked by the city seal. They weren't here for a speech. They were here for a promise. Inside, Calvin stood by the window on the 3rd floor, watching them with a look that blended exhaustion and resolve. The bruises had started to fade, but the ache lingered, not just in his ribs, but in something deeper. He hadn't wanted to become a symbol. He had wanted to serve. But symbols don't get to choose. They are forged in moments no one volunteers for. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Lieutenant Rivera, shoulders tense, expression somber. "Press is ready. Crowd's bigger than yesterday. News outlets from 3 states. You sure you want to do this alone?" Calvin turned, nodded once. "I was alone when they hit me. I won't be alone when I answer them." The press conference began not with a bang, but with a hush. Calvin stepped up to the microphone, no notes in hand. The camera zoomed. Reporters leaned forward. He took a breath, not to calm himself, but to steady the crowd. Then he spoke. "I was sworn in to lead this city with transparency, fairness, and courage, 3 values that were spat on by the very people sworn to protect them." His voice didn't waver, it cut. "But what happened to me is not just about me. It is the mirror this city didn't ask for, but now must face." He paused, letting the silence land. "Some of you watched the video and said, 'Thank God he survived.' Others said it could have been worse. But no one should ever have to say that about their mayor. No one should have to say that about any citizen." A murmur of agreement rose from the crowd. Calvin pressed on. "What you saw wasn't an accident. It was the consequence of years, decades of tolerated culture, of briefings filled with bias, of complaints swept under rugs, of silence traded for job security." He looked directly at the cameras now. "So here's what we're going to do. Not just fire officers, not just hold press conferences. We're going to rip this system up from the roots. We're launching a citywide audit of law enforcement practices. Civilian oversight panels will have subpoena power. Every training session will be open to public observers, and every officer who thinks the badge is a license to humiliate will be stripped of it. Permanently." The applause started slow. One clap, then another, but grew quickly into a roar. Some stood on benches, quietly, but no one looked away. Calvin let the noise rise, then gently raised a hand to calm it. "I didn't ask to become the man in that video, but now that I am, I won't waste the pain. Not mine, not yours. This isn't just my city, it's ours, and it's time we take it back." As he stepped away from the mic, Rivera met him at the stairs. "Sir," he said quietly, "I've served under 5 mayors. None of them ever said what you just did. They didn't have to." Calvin met his gaze. "Neither did I. Until they gave me a reason." Outside, the chant had begun, "Booker, Booker, Booker," but this time, it didn't sound like praise. It sounded like a movement. 3 weeks later, the courtroom was quieter, but the tension ran deeper. The trial had ended. Guilty on all counts. The city had watched every minute. Now came sentencing. The 2 former officers, Collins and Reddick, sat in orange jumpsuits, side by side, wrists cuffed in front of them, eyes locked somewhere just above the floor. They didn't look at Calvin as he entered, but he looked at them, not with hatred, not with triumph, but with something they weren't expecting, clarity. The judge invited the victim to speak before the court closed. Calvin rose. He didn't carry notes. His suit was the same one from the press conference, pressed, modest, and unmistakably his. He walked to the center of the room, turned not to the judge but directly toward the 2 men who had once dragged him by his collar into gravel, and then he spoke. "I know you don't believe I deserve to wear that badge," he said, voice calm as steel, "and maybe nothing I say now will change that. But the truth is, you weren't just trying to humiliate me. You were trying to protect the story you've always told yourselves, that someone who looks like me should never be in charge of someone who looks like you." Collins shifted in his seat. Radek stared straight ahead. Neither interrupted. "But here's the part that should scare you," Calvin continued. "You didn't just fail to recognize authority. You failed to recognize humanity. You looked at me and didn't see a man. You saw a challenge to your comfort, and you responded the only way men like you ever have, violently, thoughtlessly, with the confidence of people who think the system will clean up behind them." He paused, let the silence thicken, then added, "But this time it didn't." The judge asked if he wanted to request any specific sentence. Calvin shook his head. "I'm not here to ask for years. I'm here to remind the court and them that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about remembering. And I want you both to remember what it felt like to be seen, not as the one holding the baton, but as the one finally held accountable." He returned to his seat. The sentence was read. 10 years each, with no early release. The gavel struck, final and sharp. The two men were led out in silence. But just before they passed the gallery, Reddick glanced sideways, just a flick of the eye, and Calvin saw something there. Not regret, not understanding, just the first hint of fear. Not of prison, but of a world that no longer bowed its head. Outside, the city wasn't cheering. They were watching, waiting, working, rebuilding. In a mural freshly painted on the side of City Hall, Calvin's face stood beside the words, "Truth without action is just another speech." But he didn't stop to admire it. He kept walking, coat collar turned up against the wind, steps steady. There were schools to visit, reforms to sign, new officers to swear in. This wasn't the end of anything. It was just the beginning of something better.